Welcome to our professional communication, writing, speaking, and listening panel. I'm Jenny Morse, and I am the founder of Appendance, Inc., where we help train professionals across the country in improving their business writing skills. And I'm joined by Jana Sanchez, Cindy Skalicky, and Erin Hottenstein. So if you'll all go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy Skalicky, the owner of On Point Communications, where I have been working with individuals and groups for the last 5 years on presentation skills, as well as brand consulting. My background is in rhetoric, and I love working with people to help them nail their messaging. And I'm excited to be here today. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Erin Hottenstein, and I'm a trainer and coach with Public Speaking for the Professional. And we teach presentation skills and communication around personality and also the power of purpose and the power of self-esteem. And my background is in radio, television, and newspapers. That's how I got my start. And then I did some public relations work. So I also help clients with external communications. Glad to be here.
And I'm Jana Sanchez. I'm the chief alchemist of Alchemy with Words, where we work with people to transform their communication in the everyday. So I'm a speaker and a coach who believes that changing the way you communicate in small ways changes your impact in really big ways. So I work directly with individuals to help them make sure that their message is really communicating across a broad spectrum of individuals, whether inside their company or in audiences, as well as working with companies in training folks on how do we communicate better, particularly through screens, in order to figure out how we manage the new way that we're working. So we are collaborating in isolation. So we have a great panel here today, and I want to kick it off. First off, with Erin, why don't you talk a little bit about what is the kind of preparation that you need to be doing before you're ready to communicate with a group of people?
Yes, I think planning and preparation is very important, and there's a few things to think about. So first is, of course, what is the message that you're trying to get across? And you want to think about, what kinds of things that you need to put into your message. Like, is it a story, or is it a set of facts, or is it an inspirational quote? Like, what will help you get your point across? So that's one piece. But another important piece is, who is your audience? Because you should be tailoring your message to who that group of people is. I mean, maybe they need a very specific anecdote that will reach them better than another anecdote. And so you should think about that, who am I trying to reach and how can I best reach them? Another piece of the planning and preparation, though, is to help you reduce your stress in the day or two leading up to the event. So I like to think about this in two categories, environmental and physical. So environmental would be things like, how's the bandwidth at your house? And if there are 4 people trying to use the internet at the same time and it makes yours unstable, then maybe you make a request that, on Tuesday at 10 a.m. that, you're the only one on the internet. So that would be one idea. But, what else? I mean, do you need to clean your desk so that, it's calm and soothing, as opposed to stressful? Just look around and figure out what you can do to make your environment less stressful on the day of your meeting. And the other piece is physical. I had a client one time who really didn't suffer from nervousness. We worked on other things. But one day she came in and told me that she had gotten so nervous and shaky at a panel discussion that she had done, and she couldn't figure it out because it was so unlike her. And it turned out that she had skipped lunch, skipped dinner, went straight to the after work panel, and that when it was time for her to present, her body wasn't ready. She didn't have the fuel to make it happen. So it's important to think about, what does your body need to be successful here? What do you need to eat and drink? Do you need to work out in advance so that, everything you can do to bring your stress level down and be ready to go so you can shine. So those are my suggestions for preparing. Think about, your message and who you want to contact and the best way to reach them? And also, what about your environmental and physical things that you need to do to get ready?
I admit I looked around to make sure that the messiness of my desk wasn't showing on the screen at the moment. So yeah. And I think the two other things that I've seen out of that is, one, because we don't have to travel anymore, people are scheduling meetings back to back to back, which means bathroom breaks become really important, which you need to prepare for in that process.
I've forgotten that.
So that's the remote reality we're dealing with. But Cindy, I want to come to you because I think that there's also some other things that we deal with now in presenting or in communicating remotely that nobody's thinking about. And I want you to kind of talk a little bit more about slides and television.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Jana. Yes, I loved all your tips, Erin. Those were perfect in terms of in preparation, because, you know, one of the words I kept hearing in what you were saying was mindset, right? It all has a lot to do with mindset before you get in front of a group, especially virtually. But, you know, when I look back at 2020 and I think about what I was thinking about in March when everyone was home, one of the first things that came to mind was, you know what, this is going to change slide decks, this whole experience of us all working from home. I don't know if people are ready for this. So I actually developed a couple of programs on this very topic right off the bat, because I just had this sense that this was going to be something important, and it has proven to be true, because what I have found, and maybe all of you can attest to this too, and those watching, but when you're in an audience, and it really doesn't matter if it's a large group or if it's one-to-one, when you're sharing your screen with someone or you're watching a shared screen and you have to sit there for 10 minutes or 30 or 60, you know, you are truly watching TV, right? I mean, when you share your screen, the face, you know, of your own Zoom face is only about 5% of someone else's laptop, phone screen, iPad, or whatever that might be. And the rest of the screen is your slide deck. And so this is really in contrast to what we expect when we are in person, right? One of the main tenets I teach about, you know, presentation presence is that your slide deck, which is normally behind us when we're on a stage, it's your partner, right? It's your aid. Literally, it is an aid to your audience that is visual in nature, and it complements you. But you are the star of that show, right? When you're on a stage, and you need to act like it and bring your nonverbals together and move forward on the, you know, toward the front of the stage and be bigger with your voice, with your body, with all those things. And your slide deck's behind you, and you should not ignore it, but it's just your helper, right? It's the opposite in your Zoom environment, which is unfortunate, but it's reality. So what this means is you really need to pay attention to your slides. One typo is like looking at it, you know, the movie screen of Star Wars and seeing it spelled wrong, right? I mean, it's really glaring. Any of your own errors when it comes to your you know, your type, your verbiage, pixelated images, these kinds of things stick out like a sore thumb. So a couple of quick tips that I give like on repeat in my coaching sessions follow. These are from my Slide Savvy webinar, but one of them is use of images is so important on your slides. They should not be all text. That is the most boring possible way to have your audience experience your message. It's very academic feeling and sounding. And so images are key. Specifically, images of people help us relate to whatever's happening on that slide. It's actually proven in research that if you have a photo of a phone and you have a photo of a phone with a thumb on it that is using that phone, people feel more connected to the one with the thumb. So any body part, whether it's a shoe, a foot, you know, anything will help your audience feel connected to you. So go to places that have free images. There's one called unsplash.com where you can go and put your, search term in, grab free images. So images are really powerful and help guide us and help us relate to you as the speaker. And then we have the opportunity to do one other piece, which is, really knowing what that storyline is. So when you have images in a story, you want to make sure you're using emotional images of people that are feeling whatever it is that you're trying to talk about. The third piece and final tip is that building your slides is often very helpful. And what I mean by building is using that animation feature in PowerPoint. So let's imagine you have a timeline slide in your slide deck and you have 4 quarters of the year that you're going to talk about. Add each quarter one click at a time, and it gives you, the speaker, control of what your audience is seeing, and it doesn't allow them to fly ahead and read in front of you. It just also keeps the motion going so they're not staring at the same screen for 3 or 4 minutes. And then by then they're bored, they're going to click on their other open tabs on their computer. It's way easier as an audience member to cheat in a virtual environment and pretend you're paying attention when you're really not. So those are a few tips on slide design that will help avoid them being too boring and you being boring as a result.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So
I have a question because
Yeah.
I have the I'm trying to see if I can change my background. I don't often use actually here we go. Slides. I use
Oh yeah, I know
my
what you do. Yes. Yes.
And so I don't minimize my picture and share my slides. I just write on here while I'm talking.
Yep.
The green doesn't show up very well. But I've found that people feel more engaged in the remote environment because I'm actively creating
Yes.
in my
Yes.
while I'm presenting. How do you think that fits in with your suggestions?
I think that's fantastic. It feels much more, and the reason I think it works better, Jenny, is because someone in the conversation is being tactile, is touching something, is doing something, is engaging and building something. And so I would say that if you don't have a whiteboard at your house and a marker that you can set up like you have, there's plenty of other platforms and apps out there where you can draw on a screen or work with people in a workshop format. But I think I've actually used you as an example a couple of times, Jenny, about how to be engaging in unique ways. And I think it's very memorable, and that's a major plus that you have when you do that.
I just think, as you were talking about how difficult it is, that word that you use, tactile, I really think that the more ways you can engage with the audience from your own space, right? So that you're like, I like to stand back far enough that you can see my hands.
Yeah, right.
At my desk, you can only see like your head, right? And just thinking about all of those pieces, I don't know.
And I like to stand. If I'm doing a large presentation, I will prop my computer up and stand. There's something about the feeling of your feet in your shoes and your shoes on the floor that make you stand up taller and feel like you are really on, and you are. So if you're, being paid to speak to a large group, why wouldn't you go out and figure out a way to make that as real as possible? And to your point on tactile, I usually ask people to grab that pen and paper that you have next to you, like Erin was saying, setting up your space as an audience member too, to be doing the most you can to be learning actively from the speaker.
Yeah. And I think that there's something to add along to the tactile piece, in that you not only have to have the connection, that tactile moment and the feeling back and forth, but what is coming out of your mouth matters significantly as well. And one of the things that I have been noticing that is, as our communication has moved to being asynchronous, right? So we've talked a little bit about doing presentations live and having people there, but teams and folks are now working back and forth asynchronously. Email has become a huge piece of our daily lives in ways that it unfortunately was moving towards, but hadn't quite gotten there yet. And now, because we aren't in the office and you aren't stopping to have the little conversation in the hallway, or you aren't connecting with people that you run into at the coffee shop or any of those things, we're having to do all of this communication in writing and asynchronously. And there's a couple of things that I'm seeing that are happening. One, when you begin doing communication asynchronously, you are looking at a passive aggressive nightmare, because the email that I wrote last night with all of the information you needed for the meeting, I wrote while after having dealt with kids and homework and cooking dinner, and it's been a long day of Zoom meetings, and dear God, please don't ask me to get back on to a video camera because I put my hair up and I'm done. And that email was written, you know, with half a glass of wine and a long day in me, and had some snark, maybe a little bit in it. Not that I ever do snark, which then proceeded to be read by someone at 10 o'clock the next morning who had also had kids in remote learning, who may or may not have COVID because one of their classmates came down with it, and they're nervous about their own presentation that's coming up, and the tone doesn't work back and forth. So one of the things I want to dive into before I get into, you know, the different kind of brain waves that we have to be dealing with, Jenny, is how are we needing to set up emails these days, because we are doing so much this way that's different than we had in the past? What do we need to think about as we're putting emails together?
Yeah. There's so many things to think about when we're putting emails together. I'm thinking about not just like the context, right, that's affecting your tone, but also down to what words are you using to communicate? Because how you write it, Jana, like you're talking about, how you write it is different from how the other person receives it, right? And so there's a lot of times where we're thinking about writing asynchronously, like, here are all the things I need to get out of my head and tell you. And so we're thinking about, like, I need to write this down. I need to tell you this, I, and it's coming from this space inside of our head, but it's going to another person. And that person is going to receive it from us, and they're going to interpret what we said in a particular way. And so it's one thing to just like download, here are all the things, and to type that up. But then your message still has to be crafted for the audience, for the person who is going to read that, to get it from you. And you have to try to put yourself in their head. So when you're writing that message at 11 o'clock at night after a long day, like, you can write all of that stuff, but then you also have to go back and think about, how is this person going to receive it? Are they going to see it tonight? Are they going to see it tomorrow morning? No matter when they see it, it should be professional, right? And so thinking about, how can I not just get the ideas out of my head, but how can I craft them for the other person? And one of the places that I see over and over again that people start writing their messages by narrating what they're doing. So messages start with, I'm writing to you, or I'm emailing you because, or I'm following up on. You're just telling, like, yes, we know because we're seeing your message. Like, I got your email, so I see that you're emailing me, or I see that you're writing me. So it's not a useful starting point. And what we really want to think about is, okay, so it's fine if I write that in my draft. In my draft, I write, like, I'm writing to you because, okay, fine. But then delete that part before you actually send the message, because it's not relevant to the other person. And the most important thing about effective communication is really not just thinking about what are my ideas, but thinking about how they're going to be received.
And the thing I think that I'm coming back to that is like, oh, good Lord, communication is actually taking thought. And that's hard right now, right? Because we don't necessarily think about how we're communicating as we're doing it in person. And now it's taking up more brain space and brain power than we want it to, because we've got a million other things taking up that space and that power.
Yeah. Well, but I think that one of the things that you mentioned, a couple of things, speaking and writing are totally different forms of communication.
Yes.
And so a couple of things, like speaking, right now we're recording. So our speech is going to exist forever for as long as the recording is available. But normally when you're talking to people, the expectation is that the words come out of your mouth and they kind of disappear, right? We don't have a hard copy where we can go back and review and underline and cross out and whatever what you said. What you said is what you said. It just came out that way. Writing, we expect it to be crafted because it doesn't have to exist in the moment. It exists at a time lag, this asynchronous piece. So our expectations for it are different. We expect more from writing because it's supposed to be something that you thought about before you sent. And also keeping in mind, just side note, because Erin and Cindy were talking a little bit about things like posture, right, and presentation and confidence. The nonverbal signals that we use when we're speaking to each other, so your face, your gestures, your eye contact, all of those things, those account for somewhere between 66% and 92% of all the information you receive when you're talking to people face to face. So the words are somewhere, less than 33%, maybe as low as 8%, if I'm doing my math right. So the words don't matter very much when you're speaking to each other. It's the way that you speak that matters. And then when you think about writing, all of that stuff is gone. So somewhere between 66 and 92% of the information that we receive when we're speaking doesn't exist in writing. And all of a sudden, all you have are the words, which words you choose and what order you put them in. And I mean, it's horrible.
So I have a confession, Jenny. When you spoke last year at Startup Week, you did a whole session on, are we there yet with emojis, right?
Yeah.
So as you were talking, I was just thinking about the Slack channels that I'm on for certain clients and the Skype channel I use with my virtual assistants. And that is like I don't like those channels very much because of the immediacy with which the person sees what I have just written. And I often accidentally forget to hold the shift button down and I send my stuff too early and then I got to go back and delete it or whatever's going on. But I use emojis in there sometimes because it's the only way that I can, and I find it fun and it breaks that like seriousness that might be misconstrued. And like I remember over Christmas time, one of my VAs and I, we were like, oh look, there's Christmas emojis now. This is fun. Let's use them all. So I'm just going to throw this out there though. Have you noticed that is any more acceptable? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about Slack and other kinds of chat apps is really interesting because they follow the same expectations that we have around text messages. And the advantage of texting or chat apps services that we have, the advantage is we can write to each other quickly, asynchronously, right? We don't have to be together at the same moment. So I can send you a message and you can send it back while we're doing other things rather than a phone call where we're both expected to be present at the same time. And so as a result, like there's an advantage there, but you also typically only use those channels with people that you already have relationships with. So you're usually not meeting somebody on the Slack app. You have already been introduced to the team, for example, and then they're like, and we're going to add Cindy on this channel, and now she's going to be here. So you're not having to demonstrate your credibility there in the same way. And they are more about relationship kind building, right? We've already established the relationship. We already know each other. So now we're working together. When we use those channels like text messaging, we drop the expectations around writing, like email still has this formal quality where we expect it to be correct because it's the way that you meet people, right? Or virtually, remotely. But we don't have to have a conversation or a check-in on our texting or our chat apps. We don't have to say like, hi, how are you? How's your day going? Right? We drop a lot of that. So it's a less formal application to be using, and it's a less formal situation in which you're using it. And for that reason, emojis are of course part of that conversation because the only limitation on emojis presently is that you can't use them in formal situations. So formal being like you've never met the person before.
Right.
Don't know them and they have power over you.
Right. Got it.
decision-making power.
Right.
So
Okay.
Yeah, I like what you're saying though, because once you do get to know somebody, then it's like you're almost like if I know somebody really well on a team, then I even send them a Bitmoji, and those are so fun. And it's
Yeah.
almost like it brings back those nonverbals that you
Mhm.
can't convey
Love it.
by, you know, either using slang or your character has a love thing like that, that, you know, or an enthusiasm that is really hard to express with like the standard emojis. But yeah, you really have to know somebody well before you can send them a bit emoji.
Those can make or break one's day. Mostly make your, I love that addition, Erin. I think that's perfect. I love using those. And you do need to have a certain relationship, but they can really, you can really nail it with one of those sometimes.
Well, and I want to address the other part of that equation that you brought up, Jenny, which is folks that you don't know necessarily well, or people who have power over you in the decision-making space. So how do those folks communicate in a remote kind of fashion and do it well? One of the things I think it's important that people start recognizing now, because we need to recognize it as a whole in communication in general, but this has brought it more to the forefront, is that people listen differently. And most people think about listening, oh yeah, that's that thing you do with your ears. It's not. You listen with your brain, and everybody's brain is different. And we can put them into big buckets as to how people listen based on your personality and your background and some of those other things. But the really big buckets are in terms of what are we listening for when we're moving forward. So as a leader of a team who's trying to communicate something in a team setting, in a big group meeting on Zoom, any of those things, you're having to think about, okay, not everybody listens the same way I do. I'm showing you TV kinds of slides to keep your attractive interest here. But what I'm saying also has to connect with you in a way that it hasn't before, because we're not in person and we aren't getting some of that same energy. So now we need to think about, okay, how many analytical type people do I have in the room? Do I have to have numbers and data to back up what I'm trying to get people to say? Do I have more connected people in the room who are looking for how this information connects to the larger picture and where they fit in it? Do I have more relational people who need to understand how this already applies to things that they know already? So there's different kinds of listeners out there. And if you're not addressing all of the different subsets as a leader, you're leaving some of your people behind, because communication isn't working like it used to.
Right.
And so you really do have to take a moment before you get into your team meetings, before you get into presentations, and really think about, are the audience that I'm speaking to needing a very specific kind of information? So Erin, when you talk about knowing your audience, you also have to understand a bit how that audience thinks these days in order to be able to truly communicate. So I guess my question for you, Erin, coming to you, is how do you really identify who your audience is when you're just kind of out there now presenting?
Well, it is good to, I mean, research basically. I mean, you have to dig in and find something out. So, I mean, how are these people coming to you? I mean, can you go to their LinkedIn and find out, you know, what company they're from? You know, is it coming from a certain kind of group or interest that, you know, you could connect with them? I don't know, maybe it's about Rotary or a million cups or something like that. I mean, really, any pieces of information that can help you connect with them on a human level by, you know, by recognizing those common things. So just, I think you just really, you might even ask around if you have somebody that you know in common, but just do your best to find out something at least about this person or group, and, you know, multiple things if you can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Cindy, as we're putting our slides together and thinking about, you know, presenting to a team or a client or any of those things in that regard, what are the things that we can bring into some of those slides that help address the multiple different kind of brain types that you're looking at?
Well, that's a great question. And when you were talking earlier, Jana, my initial thought was, you know, I talk a lot about having to hit at head and heart at the same, in the same presentation, and with the right balance, right? So, for example, if I'm going to do a workshop with for NREL, I know I'm dealing with a lot of sciencey, very deep thinking, extremely smart people, and so I've got a job there. One is to speak to them in language they understand and to tap that desire for that techie scientific language. But I'm also there to teach them how to be, telling stories, which they're not so great at, and having to pick those things out. So, usually I'll bring with me a story of a scientific founder that is just like they are, who had the same problem that they are probably facing with communicating their idea better, and then walking them through how we pulled out a really strong story that resonated with the audience and achieved that balancing act of, you got to hit at heart. Usually hitting at heart first is the go-to that I suggest, because you want to get people to care first and then bring them into all of those fancy data points and slides and charts. That's not always the case. Sometimes facts right off the bat are the right way. It does depend on the audience, but yeah, you need to think about who's out there, what they know, what they bring. And to Erin's point, one of the things I was thinking about was with those LinkedIn connection requests, when you want to reach out to someone but you don't know them, man, I comb their their profile and I'm like, oh, they're from Chicago, so am I. Here's you can almost always find one little thing. Or I cheer for that football team where they went to school. It could be anything, but some connection point is really important.
Okay. So we've got just a couple minutes left before we wrap up. I want to get from you guys the thing, if you had to go back to March of last year and had to tell people the thing, the skill you were going to have to know in the next year and get really good at, what would be the skill that you would want people to spend time with? Now that I've given you a question completely out of the blue, right? Okay, Erin?
I'll go because I think this skill is so foundational, and yet it's easy to forget. We get busy in life and forget. But a tool that I come back to again and again is taking 3 conscious breaths. And you can use that in so many different situations, but you take a deep inhale and, let it out slowly. And this, it helps calm you down. It helps you, if you're feeling nervous before a presentation, but also we've just had so much stress, whether it's because you didn't get a bathroom break before your next Zoom meeting or whatever it is, even taking one breath, will help you reset and, get your head on straight before you open your mouth and say something.
Great. Cindy, how about you?
Well, I guess I would have to go with something related to slides, because it is just what really hit home for me from the beginning. But with regard to slides, I would say, don't make them an afterthought. They really need to be a primary objective for you to create well. And that doesn't mean they have to be fancy and that you need to pay thousands of dollars to have them done, by a designer. It means that you look at your slide deck in a new way and having a new role and a new purpose. It really is your credibility builder or sinker. And it's so important to make it engaging. And, one other tidbit I offer is just the value that can come. We all know how to run Zoom meetings now, right? I mean, we are pros at this. So if you really want to learn your message and practice it beautifully, get on a Zoom call with yourself, share your screen with yourself, deliver that presentation and record it. And then watch it back, but not as the speaker who delivered it, but as the audience member who's about to see it. And
Mhm.
pretend that you are a person whom you've never met, telling someone something that you aren't familiar with. Do you get it? Do you understand the story? That one exercise can be so fruitful, and we just have so much at our fingertips we can use in that rehearsal realm. And that one thing is really been valuable for myself and my clients. So that's what I would say.
Great. Jenny?
I have two. I can't pick one real quick. They are read more work that has been through an editorial process. So books, magazines, newspapers, something that has had more than one pair of eyes on it. Because your brain is an amazing language builder, but you have to feed it the language that you want to come out. So if you want to be a better writer, you need to feed it good writing, and then you'll become a better writer without doing much of anything at all. And the other one is real quick, building off of what Erin said about taking a breath, is taking a break. Whenever you write anything, like we were thinking about this person writing something late at night and it being read in the morning, make sure that you draft something, walk away from it, and come back to it, because your perspective changes from the writer to the reader, just like what Cindy's talking about with your perspective changes from the speaker to the audience. And to be really effective, you need to think about both sides and not just your speaker side or your writer side. You have to think about the other side of it. And that's practice that we all need. We need reminders about those things. How about you, Jana?
I think for me, it would be, yeah, it's harder now, and that's okay. It's going to take more time. Expect that you are not going to be as fast or as good as you were in person, and that's okay. But it is going to take more forethought, and therefore communication has to bump up higher on your list of things of, nope, these are the things I've always done. And now this is a thing you've always done that now takes thought. And that's a really valid piece to start to walk away with as you move forward, continuing to communicate in what is likely to be a semi-permanent remote environment for all of us.
Exactly.
For better and worse.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So thank you, ladies, for the panel today. Really appreciate that. And we hope you guys have a great startup week, and we'll see you all soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jana. Bye,
Thank you.
Erin and Jenny.